Welcome to another episode, Love Live, Savor Food and Body. And let me get us all together here. Let's get our Instagram folks in here too. Okay, great. So nice to see you all today. We missed doing this live session last week, so we just did a short thing on Instagram. But let's do a little bit more in-depth session today. And today I want to talk about a superfood that often gets a bad rap, especially if you're out hiking in the mountains. And I want you to know how important it is, especially for women in midlife or women over 40. So, what we're going to talk about today is centers around herbal medicine, some of my personal experience, also some evidence-based recommendations. But it's really important to note that any of these episodes, any of these short little mini episodes are for informational educational purposes only. In fact, the whole podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, and they're not meant to replace medical or nutritional or mental health advice from your own care team. So that's going to be really important, especially for our topic today. And I am a dietitian, I am a nutrition counselor, but I'm not your dietitian or your nutrition counselor. So that's also important to keep in mind anytime you're taking in any of this information. So let's talk about bone health, skin health, hair health, insulin resistance, menstrual cramps, fatigue, all common concerns for women going through perimenopause and menopause. So today I want to talk about a superfood plant that gets a bad rap, but could become a really essential part of your midlife wellness toolkit. So you may have run into our wild friend nettle, also known as stinging nettle. If you've been out hiking or camping or playing in the woods, and you probably felt the sting, a little bit of a tense, kind of burny, tingly sensation on your hands or your legs or your arms, wherever you rubbed up against it. And actually, that topical, we would describe it as a topical reaction to the herb. That has therapeutic benefits too, particularly for arthritis or any other inflammatory condition. If you're into slapping yourself with a bunch of stinging nettle. But most importantly, today I want to talk about nettle from an internal perspective. So if you were watching stories on Instagram yesterday, you saw that I was talking about some morning rituals that I do pretty much every day, most days anyway. And nettle infusions is one thing that I enjoy drinking each morning. So we're going to talk about nettle infusions because I got a number of questions as people saw me pouring this super green liquid into a cup, and they're like, "What is that?" And I need to learn more. So nettle or stinging nettle has a variety of health promoting traits, including stabilizing blood sugar, improving energy, and providing a variety of minerals to support healthy bones, hair, and teeth. All of these things that I keep seeing popping up in popular magazines for women in midlife with all of the lotions and potions. But nettle could be your saving grace. So nettle is a one-stop shop for many ailments, which is why herbalist David Hoffman claimed it to be, when in doubt, choose nettle. So many herbalists really turn to nettle for a lot of different uh, ailments and cure. I want to say cures. Cures is a strong word, but supportive goodness coming out of nettle. Now, I will say, because I'm an evidence-based practitioner, that there is scientific evidence from more of our traditional, what we think of as randomized controlled style studies. And so, but they're small. They are maybe of small population size, or there's not as many of them compared to the amount of research that gets done, obviously, on medications and even some other supplements. But that's not to say that herbal medicine doesn't also have its place in your well-being toolkit. But just know that a lot of times the evidence for herbal medicine is coming from kind of a different side of the science. It's coming from ancient tradition. It's coming from herbalists that have studied this work for many, many, many years. And so anytime you're reading about herbs or plants that work with health and wellness, I really encourage you to check your sources very carefully. So the stuff I'm going to talk about today comes from a book that has been cited by many reputable herbalists, modern day herbalists, and they have done their homework. So just like with any other supplement, but particularly because herbs and supplements are not regulated by the FDA, at least if you're in the United States, it's really good to do your homework and check your sources. So there will be a link to the source that I'm using today at the bottom of wherever you're watching this. Okay, back to our friend nettle. So you can harvest nettle fresh leaves in the spring before it starts to flower, or if you're a gardener, you might be familiar with spinach bolting or collard greens or chard or kale bolting, and that is when it starts to go to flower. So fresh nettle, the young tender nettle in the spring is really what you're looking for. And if you go wild harvesting, to be mindful about that. First of all, it's nettle, so bring kitchen gloves so that you don't end up with an unpleasant sting that you weren't hoping for. And second of all, try to leave the plant intact and just take the leaves, and that way that plant can keep flourishing for other people that experiment with nettle. So once you get your nettle home, you can still keep using those kitchen gloves and blanch it in a pot of water, just like you would be blanching spinach or blanching kale or broccoli or something like that. So a few minutes over boiling water, and then drain that water off. And then you can use the nettle, the steamed nettle, for anywhere you would use cooked spinach, or in a pesto, stir fry, an egg frittata, anywhere that you would use other dark leafy greens as well. But to get the most nutritional benefit out of it, I suggest making a nettle infusion. So if you were watching stories yesterday, that's what you saw me doing, was making a nettle infusion and pouring off the water. So the best way to make an herbal infusion, yes, you can collect the fresh nettles and dry them yourself. It's going to take a lot of nettles, so hopefully you would have access to a very healthy patch. But the other way that you can do it is just get dried herbal or dried herbs of nettle leaf. And you can take that leaf and soak it. I'm going to tell you the amount here in a second. Soak it in water overnight, at least 8 to 12 hours to get the biggest bang for your buck with from the nutrition, and then pour off that water after it's done steeping, and then drink that water. So that's what you saw in my stories yesterday. So, I really like sourcing the dried herb from either Frontier Organics or Mountain Rose Herbs. Getting again, a reputable source of the herb is really important. And because you're doing an infusion, this is a place where I would recommend getting organic if possible. So here's a really wild part, definitely pun intended. Approximately 2 cups of dried nettle leaf has over 800 milligrams of calcium. That's crazy. That's way more than any of the other leafy greens. And I haven't didn't check the exact amount on like a cup of yogurt or a cup of milk, but it's really high up there, especially for our plant-based sources of calcium. And so this makes it a really great choice for people that are lactose intolerant or don't do well with dairy, or choosing not to eat dairy for because they're vegetarian or they're vegan, or religious practices or whatever it is. So nettle is also really high in other bone health nutrients like magnesium, and it has been shown to help with menstrual cramping or heavy bleeding because it's also a reasonable source of iron too. So herbalist Rosalie De La Forte, I apologize if I butchered that last name, recommends using nettle to replenish iron stores during heavy periods. And if you're over 40 and you're still having periods, they're probably a little bit heavier, maybe a little bit more frequently when you're in perimenopause. So I recommend making nettle infusions, again, like I said, using dried herbs from either Frontier Organics or Mountain Rose Herbs. And to make that infusion, you can take 2 cups of dried nettle leaves and put it in either like a quart mason jar, or my favorite is to use a French press, a coffee French press, not that's been used to make coffee, because that could give you a really funky flavor. And put your 2 cups of dried herbs in the jar in the French press, and then pour 4 cups of boiling water over the top. And then you can add some flavor. From Rosalie recommends using some lemongrass or something to kind of cut the green earthiness of the nettle for flavor. But I have another suggestion for you too here in a second. So once you pour that boiling water over the dried herbs, give it a little stir. And then if you're using the French press, leave the plunger up so that the herbs can fully become hydrated and work to infuse the water with the nutrients. So once you're done with the infusion, Rosalie recommends at least 4 hours. I tend to prefer a little bit stronger, so that 8 to 12 hours or overnight to get the most nutrition bang for your buck. Then the next day, you can plunge that coffee plunger down if you're using the French press, or just pour off the liquid, maybe using a fine mesh strainer. If you're using a jar, pour the liquid over that fine mesh strainer to collect the dampened nettle. And then you have this roughly 32 ounces of a really deep green, earthy brew. And I find it tasty. It's kind of a green tea with a twist, so to speak. And it is fairly mellow in flavor. It's not super bitter, but it is super earthy and a little on the grassy side. So, what you can do to change up the flavor, if you prefer, you can take that nettle water then and reheat it and steep another herbal tea bag in there. Something like lavender or lemon balm would be really lovely. Or in the colder mornings, I prefer like using a rooibos chai. That works really well with nettle. And I've also taken that liquid, the nettle infused liquid, and put in a little bit of apple cider, so fresh pressed apple cider, especially great in the fall time, and that kind of sweetens up the grassy earthiness of the nettle. So choose your own adventure. If you would like to add some additional flavor to it, it's also nice with lemon. In the springtime or in the summertime, make it a little refreshing drink. And I just recently tried mixing a little of kombucha. It's called Clear Mind is the flavor of kombucha, which is some rosemary and some green tea. And I just put a splash of that in with the nettle infusion. Pretty good. It's almost like a fun little nutrient dense mocktail. So that was cool. So again, I highly recommend, if you're interested in learning more about herbal medicine or how different herbs and plants can support you in midlife or support you with nutrient deficiencies, and you're kind of tired of just doing the supplement thing, considering looking at nettle as another option. I will say for some people, nettle can be a strong diuretic. So particularly if you're on blood pressure medications, or really if you're on any other medications or supplements, it's really important to consult with your care team or a pharmacist before trying, especially the nettle infusion. Using nettle as in a cooking process, you're probably not going to be intaking that much of it to matter with what other medications and supplements you're taking. But the infusion, or if you see information about a tincture of nettle, really important to check out for any interactions with that. So that is our little tutorial on nettle and nettle infusions. I hope that's helpful. You can learn more again about nettle in the book by Rosalie down below, wherever you're watching this. And then also, if you're interested in more fun tips on how to thrive in midlife, you can click the link below and download the Thrive Guide, which is 6 strategies that I created to help women thrive in midlife. So that is our live episode for today. You can catch the replay on the Savor Food and Body podcast later on this week, and I will see you again soon. Take care.